Hello again. Thanks for the audience on the last few videos. Something I started thinking about is that the first video in that series probably should have been how we look at, approach, and teach self-defense, personal defense. As I often do, giving credit to my instructors, I believe that they handled the concepts of self-defense perfectly differently than martial arts. There was much more of a heavy-handed aspect to it. It was much simpler. It was much more rooted in reality, far less play, far more function, far more conceptual, and almost entirely psychological and mental. That is extremely important. If addressed the other way, it is almost certain to lead to fallibility, and that's the last place in the world you'd ever want to find out that the skills you think you have don't actually work. So behind me is our self-defense board. We don't teach self-defense often. We've done a handful of clinics over the years. It's something I take direly seriously, and it's really, really heavy for me. I've been in self-defense situations. Many of our people have been in self-defense situations. It is not a joke or a game. And so we would never teach self-defense as a class because it doesn't make any sense. Unless you're doing that as a process, like a martial art, but with a totally different concept. I know people do Krav Maga, people do all this stuff with a self-defense focus. That's excellent. Martial arts training is phenomenal self-defense insulation. But drilling and concept and things like that, it's different. We don't teach a self-defense class here because it wouldn't make sense with what we do. Additionally, before any physical stuff is ever taught, we have to make sure that the psychological and intellectual stuff is present. Because if it isn't, it doesn't matter what you know. Many people, and I don't believe much of it is ill-intentioned, teach self-defense stuff that is far too complicated to work, would never, ever, ever work on a physically dominant person. And those are things that I think are extremely important to point out, extremely important for even people that are trying to bring people in for that type of thing. Say, look, I'm not, if someone has not ever been in a street fight, if someone has not ever been in any type of hot water, that needs to be told before you're teaching a group self-defense. Because at that point, you're just guessing. You're essentially assuming how something will go. If I'd never squatted, I would not teach people how to squat. Last, before I start going over the board, I'll make sure there's a photo of this available for you, because I'm not expecting you to read off it. This is just an ease of use thing for me teaching. I apologize if the dogs start barking. We're not big enough yet to have a soundproof underground layer, and hope you enjoy this. Of course, always open to questions. First and foremost, when we say ready, willing, and able, those for us are the centerpieces of if self-defense will work at all. Ready for us is, have you thought about it? Have you thought about the fact that if I'm wandering around the city and something sketchy happens, my choices are either fight for the lives and safety of those around me and myself, or don't. But not having thought about it is almost a certain path to failing at it. Willing is the big one. A lot of people train things that they haven't fully embraced the idea of applying. If it happens, will you act with appropriate severity? And are you sure? It's hard to be sure until you've been sure, but making a resolution with yourself is a great place to start. If it happens, if something severe enough to warrant physical intervention happens, can you and will you act with appropriate severity, up to and including anything that is necessary to ensure your safety and the safety of those with you? And are you sure? If you are pathologically averse to hurting people no matter what, then you're not sure. You can train self-defense for 6,000 years. But if your head and heart are telling you that I will not harm someone in order to protect myself or others, you shouldn't train at all. you should just let the chips fall. I truly believe that is a wantonly irresponsible way to walk around the earth, but some people choose that path. And then able. Do you have the basic physical strength and coordination needed to assert your will? Are you sure? That's another one where the are you sure is a big deal. We see a lot of people that come in our doors for strength and conditioning that think they're strong. Oftentimes, and respectfully, but also very, very certainly, it's cops that when they come into our training room couldn't arrest one of our girls for $5,000. It's been offered to them. You have to be more than average physically strong. You have to be well insulated. You have to be able to apply training with violence. If you're doing 30 minutes of cardio a day and lifting 4-pound dumbbells or 20-pound dumbbells or whatever the case is, someone who is physically stronger than you will dominate you unless you are an absolute master of martial arts and fighting. That's the end of the story. And I don't like that story. I love the idea that well-intentioned, well-trained people will beat the bad guys, but it just is not the motherfucking truth. Ask me how I know. So when you're pursuing your strength and conditioning, if your goal is to protect yourself in the deepest and hottest possible water, you have to consider that. Am I lifting enough weight to be useful? Am I able to do full range, powerful body weight movements? Am I doing things that tax me physically, similar to how a very, very deep water challenging situation will tax me? If you're not, then the answer to these things is no. You are not ready, you are not willing, you are not able. I don't like that answer, but it's the answer. Anytime we've had self-defense clinics, there's 1 or 2 people that have been in hot water situations that don't train with us, and they come in to just participate in the clinic. When we get into the later part, which will include some physical practice of high probability scenarios and very low tech escapes and evasions and attacks, they almost always get so shaken up and rattled and everything that they really can't continue or they can't do it properly. And what we're talking about here is an extremely curated, careful practice. This isn't hazing. It's not a big guy attacking a smaller person for the sake of teaching them a lesson. So if at 20 to 30% intensity, you're upside down and shaken up and despondent, imagine what would happen in 100%, 110%, in the dark, in jeans, in a coat, in the rain, in the snow, on your phone, whatever the case is. The more variables you add, the more fallible a skill set gets. So the first thing we do, and we spend quite a bit of time doing it, we're abbreviating this a lot for the sake of the internet, is we go through the ready, willing, and able, and we go through the micro details that we've all learned from that. We usually have some very responsible, hard-minded law enforcement people speak. I talk about some of the experiences and practices that I've had, and we make sure that people understand that this is a mind game. It's a physical game for sure, but strength and conditioning, properly handled strength and conditioning, gets you far further than some LARPy once-in-a-while self-defense training. If you are physically assertive and have the ability to assert your will with violence, most people are not going to mess around with you. And if they do, it's not going to last long because most people who are opportunistic in those ways don't want to fight. They want easy targets, they want it to be over, they want to get what they want to get and move on. They don't want to get smashed and hit and pulled and choked and poked in the eyes and hit in the neck and all this nasty stuff. They just don't want to. So we harp on the psychological, we harp on the intellectual, we make sure that that is absolutely ingrained, and we give people to opt out. If you do not have the physical strength and coordination to assert your will, we respectfully request that people find that and achieve it prior to thinking any of the stuff we're going to practice is going to work. If they have questions about whether or not they will act with appropriate severity if something happens, we do the same thing. That needs to be sorted out prior to practicing anything physical that you think might work, because it won't. If someone attacks you and you know all the martial arts on earth and you don't want to hurt them, they're still going to hurt you. That's the end of the very sad short story. Once we move on, then we start talking about the fact that a lot of times not getting into trouble is simply a matter of paying attention to not getting into trouble. The immediate vocalization of screaming and yelling, calling for help, anything that the situation requires has to be vicious, violent, and as loud as you can possibly make it. Constant attentiveness and assertiveness is what's going to keep you from getting into these situations in the first place. It's talked about really, really often, but right now, these tiny robots that we carry around are essentially just keeping us from focusing on an awful lot of more important stuff. Could be social interaction, could be getting lost, but it very, very well can be getting mixed up with the wrong people at the wrong times because that's what they're looking for. Using someone like myself as an example, if I'm walking around squared away at night, chances are relatively low of me getting messed with. It's happened, but it's not highly probable. If someone far smaller than me is on their phone, walking around, paying attention to anything except their surroundings, they've made themselves a very, very easy target. Even someone larger, even some of these talented people that we have here that look physically imposing, if you're walking around in the wrong part of town or you're walking around and some heightened situations are on the table, if you're looking at your phone, you are 100% more likely to be attacked or victimized than if you're not, because people want easy targets. The other thing I'll absolutely say is this also falls into the same category as believing that you have a skill set that you don't. None of us are Spider-Man. You could be on your phone thinking that you're all set because you've trained for many, many years and you've got every single knife and G10 stabby thing and guns and all this other stuff. But if someone walks up behind you and you're on your phone and they put you in a headlock or a bear hug and toss you to the ground, all that stuff is off the table. So, in addition to the first couple of things that we mentioned, the most important way to stay out of trouble is simply paying attention to staying out of trouble. And this is where we also have a responsibility to others. If we know we're out of trouble and we see someone else in a volatile situation not applying those same strategies, I don't know, for my money, I keep an eye on that. I pay attention to it because it's important to me. The people around me, even if I don't know them, and even if they're not by specific standards my responsibility, they're my responsibility. We should always be watching. If we have a protector's mind, that doesn't simply apply to those that we know. So, things to avoid. Again, lots of common sense here, but it's common sense that often sneaks by, and it often sneaks by some really, really high-level thinkers. Anytime we do a clinic of this nature, we have people come in that are very, very talented, very, very intelligent, and they hadn't thought about a lot of this stuff. Not unlike a lot of the strength and conditioning stuff that we do. False confidence would be, I'm tough, I'm strong, I have a martial arts background, I'm gonna be all set. Who knows? Again, ask me how I know. If the situation goes sideways, acting like you have everything you need in the bag is the wrong choice. You stay calm, you stay confident, but at the same time, there's no false bravado here. You're not antagonizing for any reason. You're making as much noise as you possibly can, and in any moment you have possibly, you're getting the fuck away from that situation. Street fighting is not a good idea ever. And there are people that will romanticize it, and I don't know, maybe they know something I don't. But I can tell you that no one wins. It never feels like you think it's gonna feel. And the risk reward is so far imbalanced, it's hard to even talk about. Reliance on outside help is a sketchy one. Because at that point, we're talking about a phone, we're talking about an item in the purse, we're talking about something else that you may have practiced with, but unless you're practicing with your tools under duress, fatigue, because immediately when something like this happens, your heart rate is gonna go through the roof, your breathing is gonna feel like you've been riding an airdyne for an hour at full speed, and it's gonna happen like that. So you got a Hello Kitty fucking brass knuckle in your purse. There is a very, very low probability chance of you getting that thing out and using it on an attacker unless you've been training that thing like your life depends on it. And it might, but unless you've been training that way, it's a faulty plan. Your better plan is to scream, run, and do as much physical damage as you possibly can if it comes to that, and there's no avoiding it. Even a phone call. If you're in the midst of something, you have to make enough racket that someone else is going to help you. If you get to your phone and you have a moment safe, fine. But the idea of relying on these things is the very same as a very, very weak person relying on a 6-week self-defense course. It is a recipe for failure in the most difficult moments in your life. So, something we do in training, something we do in the self-defense training rooms, but something that we do in strength and conditioning all the time is baiting the panic response. And what that means to us is getting our instinctive responses to high-level stress to be something that we consider. A very simple one, and I'm not comparing this to a street altercation, would be riding an Airdyne bike as fast as you can for 15 calories. And with 0 steps between them, getting off that bike and being expected to jump rope. As soon as you hit 250 jump rope, you're expected to get on the ground and hold a perfect hollow body position. When new people come in, that seems like the sword in the stone. They can barely do it. After a little bit of stress inoculation and baiting of that panic response, it becomes something that's much more manageable to them. They can think through it, their positioning improves, everything improves. Pace, composure, everything. You can train your panic response. You can train your ability to adapt to deep water, but it has to be deliberate and it has to be hard. Exposure to conflict and discomfort, even in a controlled environment, will begin to condition our responses and build appropriate confidence in our ability to act. That means make a distinction between training martial arts and training something that you would be expecting to use in a self-defense situation. Again, it's not the most fun thing in the world to think about, but it's a really, really important thing to think about. If you're not making the distinction in here, you're not going to make the distinction out there. Some of this seems a little bit heavy-handed, but the reality is the world has made it this way. 20, 30, 40 years ago, a lot of this stuff would have made a lot less sense. But every single year, it proves more and more important. People get more opportunistic. The cities get more and more dangerous. The ability of law enforcement to take care of any of these problems gets less and less by the day. And that's not saying that there's not great ones out there trying to help, but the great ones are squashed. They're neutered. And they're definitely far less in the overall scheme of things than you would like them to be. So it's on us, and we have to think about it. When we talk about people practicing self-defense techniques, we say you have to practice ad nauseum until something is automatic. People don't like to hear that. They love the idea of practicing something 50 or 60 times until it looks better, until it feels a little bit better. But oftentimes what is not considered is the fact that when the water gets deep, there is no way that you're going to apply something that is not absolutely just hardwired into your body. Again, to credit my instructors, they used the term hardwired, and they were highly experienced and extremely talented, and they knew it when they saw it. I've used that as my entire framework for training people, strength and conditioning, martial arts, self-defense, anything. I can see when it's hardwired, and I can see when it's being forced, and it takes a lot of time and practice for that hardwiring to occur. So if you are relying on a technique, even if it's a high probability attack, like bear hug, overhand, something like that, shoving, simple stuff that will usually happen in a self-defense scenario, and an extremely simple response to that, it still needs to be drilled. It needs to be drilled until it feels like something that's as easy as tying your shoes. Because then, when something hits, your body is going to react, your mind is going to react, you're not going to have to consider it. So, what we advise people, recommend to people, is all of that can feel heavy. In the meantime, develop, maintain physical strength, mental awareness, and a strong will. We can practice strength development every single day. We can practice mental awareness, mindset adjustments every single day. And willpower comes back to these first 3 ideas. Ready, willing, and able. Are you ready, willing, and able to defend yourself and others if possible? And are you sure? This is the last place in the world that you ever want self-deception to come into play. We say often, self-deception is only forgiven in the shallowest water. So, possibly should have come before the weapons videos. Pleased to share it with you now. Always ask questions if you have them. And hope you enjoy this. Thanks again for watching. Thanks again for being here.